Welcome back to Midwest Access. I'm your host, Jesse Allison, and I'm here with Jack Stolfus today with that recent school shooting. And of course, we just continue to have these. I hate that that's, a phrase in our vocabulary. But, parents are asking what they can do to prevent their child from acting out violently. And I know we can't control everything, but you had reached out actually with, hey, I would like to speak on this. And I was thrilled because this is a very, very difficult topic to even approach. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, sure. I'm happy to be here. You're right. It's a serious concern for a lot of parents right now, particularly with it coming to our home here in Minnesota with Annunciation Catholic Church. So what I'm going to talk about are some risk factors for parents, but I want to say to you and to the audience that not one of these necessarily is something that you need to panic about, even a combination, although I'll talk about one that's a bit of a red flag. But I think what's important for parents is to pay attention to some of these risk factors. So let's talk about them. The first one is basically the kind of risk of violence around this particular generation. There's more bullying, sometimes being bullied, fighting. It's more of a time of risk for a lot of young adults.
Yeah.
And the causes of death are really related to violence. The top three causes are accidents, which is overdose and accidents in cars and things like that, and then suicide and homicide. Those are the top three causes.
Wow.
So you've got a segment of our population that is at higher risk for violence. And, the average age of the school shooter right now is 17. And if you look at the more recent assassinations with Mangione and Tyler Robinson, both in their 20s, and of course the shooter at Annunciation was in his 20s too. So it's in this block here that the higher risk exists. Beyond that, there are mental health concerns too. 1 out of 4 young adults has some kind of depression or anxiety condition. Over 70% of Gen Zs report being lonely, experiencing loneliness. And 1 out of 4, Jesse, this is really scary to me, are cutting off relationships with their parents at one time or another. And that is alarming because that disconnection from parents and sometimes with friends creates a higher risk for this population. Mangione, the person who's alleged to have shot the United Healthcare CEO, had cut off his relationships with his parents and with friends, went off the grid.
Wow.
And you get that type of situation, the only person you're talking to and listening to is the person in your head.
Yeah.
And that's pretty scary.
That's very scary.
Oh, yeah. So those are factors. And I think another factor is just the access to weapons or access to firearms. And, we know from research on the area of drug abuse and drug addiction is that if the higher the access to illicit drugs, the higher the likelihood of use of illicit drugs.
Makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, same thing applies to firearms, The greater the access, particularly if you have a combination of these other risk factors, the greater likelihood that you may act with that particular thing. Another thing is how social media is playing into this. Social media, through their algorithms, can promote certain violent content. There's a study done of 1,200 teens, and what they found was 70% of the violent content was pushed out by an algorithm.
Wow.
Only 6% of those teens actually sought that kind of information.
Oh, that's
really scary.
Yeah, it is.
So that's something that I think we have to figure out how to address that.
Yes.
And then I think the final thing is just to keep in mind that there's a risk here, and this is the one that I would say is the red flag, and that is that if you start hearing information about a threat or specificity about a threat, that is something to pay attention to.
Okay.
We know that from the suicide research that the more concrete the discussion is about taking my life and when and where and how I'm going to do it,
Right.
the higher predictability. And I think the same thing applies when we're talking about violence. If there is a threat, specific situation, target, means, that's something that we have to pay attention to as parents.
Yeah.
We have to take that seriously and intervene.
Yeah. Oh, very scary stuff, but it is nice to know what we can be looking for. It always feels
Oh, yeah.
better to know what we can do, but to understand some of these statistics and studies, it is really frightening.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, we are going to continue the conversation when we return just after the break, so hang tight with us. We are continuing the conversation with Jack Stolfus. We're here to discuss how to notice and prevent violent outbursts in our children. And so one of the things we're talking about is, what can we be looking for? How can we prevent violence? Is it possible to prevent violence in our teens and young adults?
Well, ultimately, there's no assurance that any one thing that a parent does or doesn't do is going to prevent violence. Right. But there's some good news, and I want to share this with parents. There's things that parents can do to mitigate the risk of that or to reduce that. First of all, it is one of the things that parents can do is to connect with their kids. That is to build closer relationships with your young adult and your teens. Some people say, well, we're letting go, but I argue, no, move in and help them with their identity development, their independence. Say, I'm here to support you in as you're moving forward. So that's really important. And taking your teen or young adult to breakfast or lunch and just saying, how are things going? Learn to listen. Ask, hey, is there something I can do to be more helpful as a mom or a dad?
Right.
It's a great thing to do. Then I talk to parents about being more of a coach and a consultant. So less of telling and directing and more of listening and consulting. And consulting around things like, how do you deal with anger? How do you deal with conflict? How do you deal with issues at school or teachers or problems that you're having? But also, I think I talk about a sandwich approach to consulting, which is to say, hey, I'm going to give you some ideas and some advice, but you make the decision.
Right.
So that you set it up that way, and then you give them the advice, and then you say, but you have to make the decision.
And that's kind of that letting go piece.
Absolutely. Yeah, it lets them feel like they're still in charge. They're going to make the decision. I'd say, hey, I'm not going to be mad at you if you don't follow my advice. So that's really important. I think another thing that is important is being able to move them away from social media.
Yeah.
Some parents say, should I shut the Wi-Fi down at night because they're up there gaming till 3 a.m? I think a better approach is get them out and connecting with friends. Get them, they should be working or going to school or something, not just sitting at home. But get them out. Maybe it's going to a health club or something. I talk about in my book, pull them out rather than push them out. So don't just sit there and say, hey, get out, get a job or go jog or something like that. Say, come on, let's go for a walk. Or let's go to the club, or let's volunteer and do something together.
Yep.
So those are ways to get them away out of social media or creating this connection with other people. So that's really important. I think that beyond that, try to understand the social media experience that they have. Say, hey, help me understand, what Xbox is. I don't even know what it is. How do I play the game? Can you teach me that? And what are you getting on social media? Do you see any of this violence kind of thing on social media? So that's clearly another way to try to engage and get into the conversation. So we know that, in the area of drug prevention and drug abuse prevention, that as you talk about illicit drugs with your kids, you see a reduction in illicit drug abuse. So that's
Isn't
where
that
it's really
amazing?
Yeah.
We do have power as parents. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think the same thing with violence. If you talk about it and use of guns and things like that and get that conversation going, I think you reduce the risk of it. So
That is so cool.
So I think the final point I'd make is if you're a gun owner, you're a hunter, or just for your personal safety, is lock up those guns. And you're the only one that should have access to it. Sue Klebold, who was the mother of Dylan Klebold, who was one of the shooters in the Columbine school shooting, missed certain signs. And one of them was her son coming up to her and asking her if he could buy a gun. You know, what do you want a gun for? Because the
Right.
family, they were not hunters. They had no guns in the house. But it was an early signal.
Sure.
So we need to pay attention to these kinds of things. And if there's as I said earlier, if there's a threat kind of thing, we need to be sure to address it. At the end of the day, I think building a good relationship, I talk about that in my book, The Parents Launch Code. There's 6 practices that if you do these practices or you apply these in your relationship with your young adult or adolescent, you have a better chance of being the best parents you can be and reducing the risk of any kind of violent action. So.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for reaching out. Thank you for being willing to come drive here and tell us all about
Sure.
this. And this is his book, and I know we've got a graphic too that shows, but follow up. And it is something we talk about a lot with, people our age that have kids in those teens and 20s. And so I'm very glad to have you here and to connect people with you.
Yeah, I was going to say, and the website that I have is parentslettinggo.com.
Okay.
So you can get to the book that way or on Amazon. So.
Perfect. Thank you so
All
much.
right, thank
Yes.
you.